The story begins in 1973 in a Soviet central prison where a prisoner named Bohemian had been incarcerated for nearly 2 years. He observed that Captain Vorkins was a very cruel man who brutally beat the prisoners for his amusement. Soon, Bohemian learned about a workshop where every prisoner dreamed of working. In fact, any prisoner who worked in that workshop for 2 days would have 3 days deducted from their prison sentence. Moreover, while working in the workshop, they could focus on their tasks, making the days pass more easily. One day, the warden called Bohemian to his office and offered him a chance to reduce his sentence. He wanted Bohemian to assemble a team that would double the productivity in the workshop. He also stated that if his team succeeded in doubling the work, Bohemian would be released in a year. The warden said he could choose any prisoners for his team, but when Bohemian expressed his desire to select a prisoner named Chet, the warden flatly refused. Chet was a dangerous killer who had brutally murdered 2 people. But when Bohemian insisted that Chet was very hard-working and essential for the team, the warden eventually relented. Bohemian formed his team, which included Chet, Needle, Old Master, and Crazy. Bohemian's friends were a bit scared of Chet, so he reassured them to let Chet work in silence without bothering him. In fact, Bohemian and Chet were good friends because some time ago, Chet had saved Bohemian's life. Soon, their team arrived at the workshop where Needle began to tease a guard, making the guard very angry. However, he couldn't beat Needle yet because they had urgent work to do. After a while, the guard came and distributed chocolates to everyone because his wife had given birth to a boy. But later, the captain warned the guard to keep his distance from the prisoners, stating that there was no difference between them and animals. If the guards seemed lenient, they would be torn apart. Meanwhile, Bohemian's team's troubles began when Hat refused to start the machine. The captain signaled Bohemian, who went to Chet, and Chet informed him that a pigeon was stuck in the machine. They all tried to open the machine, but they had no tools for the task. Just then, the captain and the guards arrived to see what was happening. Although a pigeon was stuck in the machine, the captain ordered the machine to be turned on anyway. When the guard was about to press the button, Chet grabbed him by the neck and insisted that the machine would not start until the pigeon was freed. Suddenly, Needle attacked the captain from behind, knocking him unconscious, and then he asked Crazy to close the door. Seeing all this, Bohemian was quite alarmed because the situation was getting out of control. Now the captain and the guard were in their custody, and they began to think about their next move. Bohemian suggested that he would call the police and tell them everything, but Chet threatened him that if he did anything like that, he would kill the captain. The captain, in anger, stated that none of them would survive, which frightened them all. Bohemian then suggested that they should get back to work and let the captain and the guard go, while Master and Crazy agreed with Bohemian's plan. However, Needle knew that if they released the captain, he would lose his life. Then Bohemian tried to convince Chet to let the guard go, but Chet insisted that the machine would not start until the pigeon was free. Bohemian tried to open the machine again but failed. Then Hat threatened that if the pigeon was killed, he would kill the guard too. Hearing this, the captain laughed and mocked Chet for causing such a ruckus over a small bird. This made Chet furious, and he charged at the captain, but the other prisoners managed to calm him down. Bohemian knew that the other guards would arrive soon, so he devised a plan to free the captain and the guards so that, in return, they could also safely return to prison. Soon after, the guards began knocking on the door, and the captain shouted to them about the situation. Bohemian went to the door to speak, but just then the guards outside began to open the door. One guard got into a vehicle and went to call for more guards. Meanwhile, Old Master said he would go outside to talk to the guard. As he raised his hands and stepped outside, a guard aimed a gun at him, and suddenly, without any warning, the guard fired, killing Master on the spot. When Bohemian and his companions learned of this, he angrily smashed the control unit, causing the door to close again. After some time, the prison warden and an ambulance arrived. The warden said he wanted to talk to the prisoners to resolve the matter. He tried to send the police away to prevent the inmates from taking any rash actions, but the police chief was unwilling to budge. Meanwhile, the group of prisoners was trapped inside and had no idea what to do. Bohemian gave the captain some water and suggested they should open the door and surrender to the police. But Crazy argued that they would face the same fate as Old Master. Just then, Chet threatened that if anyone opened the door, he would kill the guard and the captain, and everyone would have to fend for themselves. Eventually, everyone understood that if they wanted to survive this ordeal, they had to free the pigeon. The police chief told the warden that he would give them 1 hour to resolve the situation, or they would have to forcefully enter. The warden then spoke to the prisoners through a microphone, urging them to release the captain and the guard for their own good. He tried to assure them that nothing would happen to them and that they would forget this incident as a mere mistake. Then Bohemian thought about trying to open the machine again and took the keys from the captain to free Chet from his chains. When Needle protested, Bohemian insisted that they would open the door only after freeing the pigeon. This led to a scuffle between Needle and Bohemian. Needle was about to kill Bohemian with a tool when Chet grabbed him from behind and slammed him against the wall. After that, they all focused on opening the machine. Chet used his strength to open the lid, but there was still another layer to remove. They saw that the pigeon was still alive. Bohemian asked Hat why he was putting in so much effort to save a pigeon. Chet explained that he had terrifying dreams where he was buried alive in a coffin, screaming for help, but ultimately dying from suffocation. He saw himself in that pigeon and felt that if it were saved, maybe he would be saved too, and his nightmares would stop. Then Bohemian asked the guard for help in opening the machine, and the guard said they should first free the captain so he could go outside and tell the police everything. However, Needle was not at all willing to let him go, and suddenly he struck the captain with a piece of wood. Bohemian explained to the guard that if they didn't save him, they would all be killed because the government would not hesitate to use bullets just to save him. Then Bohemian threatened to bind the guard with chains, and he agreed to help. Meanwhile, outside, the police chief and the warden were trying to figure out how to resolve the situation. The warden was sure that the captain and guard were still alive. Inside the workshop, Crazy and the guard went to get a tool from another room. Crazy said that Chet wasn't a bad guy from the start, but one night ruined his entire life. That night was his brother's wedding, and he had drunk too much. When his brother told him to stop in a drunken rage, Chet ended up killing him. When his father tried to intervene, Chet killed him too. When he regained his senses, he regretted it and surrendered to the police. Then all the prisoners worked hard to open the machine. Just then, outside, the warden called Bohemian to talk at the door. Their hour of grace had passed, but Bohemian stated they needed 1 more hour to free the pigeon. The warden spoke to the captain, who claimed there was no pigeon and that the prisoners were looking for a chance to escape. Then the warden informed them that they had 60 more minutes to release the captain and guard. He reminded Bohemian that he was risking his life and that he had promised to complete the workshop work within a year. When the other prisoners heard this, they became furious because it meant Bohemian had used them for his own benefit. Seeing this, the captain started laughing loudly, and Bohemian punched him. Then he proceeded to free the captain while Needle opposed him. Bohemian insisted that he would only release the captain and keep the guard captive. When Bohemian brought the captain outside, the police chief suddenly opened fire on them. Bohemian quickly brought the captain back inside, and the situation escalated again. Meanwhile, the warden punched the police chief in anger, but the chief said that their time was up, and they had to get their soldier out. Just then, several soldiers arrived in a truck. On the other hand, all the prisoners managed to drill a hole in the machine. Bohemian reached in to try to pull the pigeon out, but it was still out of reach. Needle even tried to cut the lid with a grinder, but to no avail. Finally, they decided to drill another hole, but they lacked the necessary tools. Then Bohemian took the keys to the tool room from the captain. Meanwhile, outside, the soldiers were preparing to storm the workshop. Inside, the prisoners were struggling to melt the metal with a welding machine, but they didn't know how to operate it. The captain then stepped forward to help them. Outside, the soldiers were preparing to blow up the door. Eventually, the prisoners succeeded in opening the machine, but the pigeon didn't want to fly away. Just then, The captain pulled out his gun and aimed it at the prisoners. But suddenly, Chet leaped and grabbed his neck, crushing his skull brutally, killing him. This left the guard in shock. After this, Chet freed the pigeon and washed it with water. Just then, a massive explosion occurred at the door, and several soldiers rushed in. All the prisoners lay on the ground in fear. But Chet stood up and released the pigeon into the air. The police chief ordered them to open fire, and during this incident, Hat was killed on the spot. However, the rest of the prisoners lay on the ground celebrating the pigeon's freedom. The police chief tried to shoot them too, but the guard stopped him. The guard falsely claimed that Hat had taken them all hostage, which is why the prisoners were sent back to jail without any punishment. Bohemian and his team hailed Chet as a hero, and with the release of the pigeon, Chet achieved the purpose of his life and passed away. So, do you think Hat did the right thing? Be sure to comment below. See you in the next video.